Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Joel Hancock. I'm back here. I guess we can call these episodes now, but episode 2 of 5 Minutes at 5 on a Friday. Last Friday, it turned into more like 11 minutes at 5 on a Friday. So I'm going to do my best. I've got notes this time to try and keep my comments and everything a little bit more condensed, so that we can get out here in 5 minutes. I'm going to do a better job trying to keep track of the comments if anybody has anything to say while I'm doing this. So today, the suggestion comes from Brenton Markham, who's a friend of mine. He asked if I would comment on some popular or famous cases and maybe share my opinion on those. And one of the ones that he mentioned happens to be one of my favorite cases. One of my favorite to study, read about. I provided some links in the description for you to be able to find out more about Gideon versus Wainwright, but that's what we're going to dive into today. I'm going to try and be very brief about the case, and then I'll share some thoughts with you that I have about this very, very important case that is near and dear to my heart. So, Gideon versus Wainwright, 1963. Clarence Earl Gideon is charged with a felony crime in state court in, I believe it was Florida. Yeah, Supreme Court of Florida was the appeal. Clarence Earl Gideon had a criminal history and was not the most articulate man in the world, but he did have some experience in the criminal justice system. He asked the court to appoint a lawyer to represent him in his criminal felony trial, and the court declined. At that time, state courts could only appoint lawyers to represent you if you were charged with a capital crime, which means if you were charged with something that could possibly carry the death penalty. He was not charged with a capital crime, and so his request for a court-appointed lawyer was denied. He was tried, surprise, surprise, he was convicted, and he went to prison. He challenged his conviction to the Supreme Court of Florida, which upheld the conviction, and then later he wrote a handwritten petition from his prison cell to the Supreme Court of the United States, challenging his conviction and ultimately saying or suggesting that he was denied a fair trial on account of the fact that he had no counsel to represent him at his trial. And so the Supreme Court addressed the issue. They appointed a very good lawyer to represent him in the Supreme Court, who later became a justice of the Supreme Court. And there, Gideon argued, like I said, that the simple fact that he was denied counsel when he could not afford one for his felony trial means that no matter how the case played out, that justice could not have been served. And ultimately, the Supreme Court agreed, saying that the assistance of counsel is a fundamental right essential to a fair trial. And that if you were too poor to hire your own counsel, that the state must afford you one. Otherwise, there is no fair trial. So that's Gideon versus Wainwright in a nutshell. There is a whole lot more about it that you could go into. If you're in a law school class, you would devote, maybe an entire week to studying Gideon versus Wainwright. So I want you to check out the links and the other stuff that I provided. But Brent also asked, so what do I think about Gideon versus Wainwright? Well, number one, I think that it's absolutely right that there is no way for there to be a fair trial in America without the assistance of counsel. One thing that they talk about in Gideon versus Wainwright, the judge in that case says that governments, both state and federal, quite properly spend vast sums of money to establish machinery to try defendants accused of a crime. In other words, the state is already devoting a ton of resources into prosecuting you. If you don't have someone there that either with know-how, experience, or otherwise knows how to respond to that, then your chance of having a fair trial is almost nothing. I'll give one brief example before I go, because I see I've got 20 seconds. There was a trial in Superior Court in Carteret County this week where a man was charged with a very serious crime, and he waived his right to counsel. There were jurors called to hear that case that refused to hear it because they said that they couldn't hear a case where where somebody was not represented by a lawyer, for fear that if they were to get convicted, they would have to live with the fact that they convicted somebody who didn't even have a lawyer representing them throughout the trial. Now, that's not the prosecutor's fault. That's not the DA's fault. The DA doesn't. It doesn't fall upon the DA to to dismiss a case against somebody who was elected to represent themselves. Actually, the injustice that is done, the defendant is doing to himself when he goes in without a lawyer. So, what do I think about Gideon versus Wainwright? I think that it's absolutely right. This last one last thing to say from the case before I let you go. The noble ideal that all people stand equal before the law cannot be realized, and this is Gideon versus Wainwright, realized if a poor man charged with a crime has to face his accusers without a lawyer to assist him. I would add one final thing, that it doesn't matter whether you're poor or not, that there cannot be a fair trial in America if you don't have somebody representing you. So if you can afford a lawyer, hire the best lawyer that you can get. If you can't afford a lawyer, get a public defender to represent you. I'll have more to say about public defenders later, because I know that there's a lot of misinformation and bad ideas about what a public defender does, whether they're good lawyers or not. Let me just say that they are good lawyers. They are some of the best, and I have the utmost respect for our public defenders here. So anyway, that is Gideon versus Wainwright. It was supposed to be in 5 minutes or less. We're just under 7 minutes now, but if y'all have any other questions or some topics that you'd like to see me discuss next time, I'll try and do it in under 5 minutes next time. Otherwise, if you're charged with something, get a lawyer. Thanks, y'all. See ya.